You're listening to the Nerd to Know Media Network. Join us at nerdtoknowmedia.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, it's now time for our main event. Take a trip back in time to the golden era of the wrestling world with your host, Chris Techrold Blade. Welcome to Once Upon a Turnbuckle.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Once Upon a Turnbuckle. So it's been so long. I've been kind of taking the summer off, but I've come back. Not just, this isn't like the last one, but I've come back for a very, very special reason. There's one of my all-time favorite matches, one of my all-time favorite events, probably still the greatest pay-per-view in history, in my eyes. It's coming up and celebrating its 30th anniversary soon. And there's only one person that I could welcome back onto the show to talk about it. Stephen Bell, author of the immense Dynamite Davey, just behind me. How are you doing, sir? Welcome to Once Upon a Turnbuckle.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'm glad to be back. Like I said, I just really wanted to do something a bit special for this. It's such an iconic 30th event. It's only going to come around sort of once, is this, especially it being so close to the release of the book. I just really wanted to do something for it, and I'm glad that you can accommodate me for this.
No worries. And I didn't have it to hand when I spoke to you last time, but there we go.
Not sure I did, actually.
No, I don't think it had been released yet. So I was so excited. You know, there we go. One of the, I've said in my review, if not the best wrestling book I've read in so long. It's such a fantastic book. Firstly, how are things been? What's your world been like since this has been released? Sort of, you know, how's it been received?
It's been received above and beyond anything that I anticipated. I think this, I can't remember how much of this we discussed last time, but getting it over the line was a real challenge this time around. We hit some challenges, and I didn't have any of that with the previous two books. My previous two books, it was just a matter of excitement to see it out there, to see it in people's hands. It's such a thrill.
Yeah.
And so when the good reviews started coming in, it was just a bonus, really. Whereas this one, because of the challenges that we'd had, and almost was fast to say accusations about its sort of the motivations behind it, which, you know, I was clear from my motivations from the very start that it wasn't going to be nothing but positive about both guys. What that meant was that I'd got so much extra pressure, not just for me, but for those that had put so much faith in me, the likes of Bronwyn and Ross Hart. They put so much faith in me to deliver something that I declared from the start would be positive overall, while still challenging those negative aspects and those controversies. But it's so easy when you're so embroiled in a project for 18 months like I was. It's easy to sort of lose a little bit of perspective, or nobody knows the story as good as you do. So much research. So I'm thinking, well, to some people, it might appear negative. Those who only know who only know the British Bulldog for SummerSlam 92 or whatever it might be. Whereas what I felt is that anybody who'd read the various other books that are out there that mention the guys, or see the shoot interviews, or know a lot about sort of the negative side, the reputation that got built up about Dynamite over the years. Not so much Davey, because he was always such a popular guy, but obviously stumbled across controversies in his life. So to different people, it were going to appear differently on that spectrum of positive or negative and things like that. And so what I knew is, obviously, the people who knew the story well your people who are going to be reviewing the book, the wrestling journalists, your big wrestling fans who had read all the books and seen the documentaries that the guys who mentioned it. Yeah. It were their opinions that really counted and were going to be where I knew whether I'd got it right or wrong, whether I'd tread that line right. Because the other side of it was, if I'd have gone too far the other way, and it had been classed as a puff piece, and it had been a whitewashing, it had ignored any controversies, I don't think people would have even finished it. They'd have thrown it on fire, wouldn't they? You know, it wouldn't have been good as toilet paper at that point, because people, I think enough of the negative aspects were spoke about before, where it was sort of known that they were out there. So I felt so much pressure. It ruined the build up to the release, because I was so nervous, talking losing sleep and things like that about how it was going to be received. And then when the reviews started coming in, so overwhelmingly positive, especially mentioning what a tribute it was to both guys. It meant so much to me.
Job done.
And I know it meant so much to Ross and Bronwyn as well. I enjoyed more, I think, the worldwide release, which was just sort of maybe 6 or 7 weeks ago now. That enabled me to sort of enjoy it with more confidence, see more and more reviews coming in, more and more sales getting made. And, by then it had been so overwhelmingly positively reviewed by people like Dave Meltzer, Mike Johnson, John Pollock, and then ultimately, as you know, this weekend Mick Foley put an essay on about it.
Yeah,
I heard through the grapevine, by the way, the reason that he read it so far, he put on his review, which is on his Facebook page, that he read it in 3 sittings. Now I know why. That's because he's doing his stand-up show that he does, his one-man show.
Yeah, you're in Australia, isn't he?
That in Australia and New Zealand as it is, so he's had some long flights.
Yeah.
So he's been reading it on his flights. Now, what I heard before I put the review on, what I heard through the grapevine was that he'd actually been speaking about it during his shows to the audience. He'd been telling the audience about it during his shows. Now, what my thought is, I know what it's like to read a book that really means a lot to you and sticks with you for a long time, and you can't wait to talk about it to people. And I thought that's what's happened. I thought it's really stuck with him. It's meant a lot to him. And when he's got on stage with a microphone in his hand, he ain't been able to help himself but talk about it. I class that as, like, at the time, the ultimate compliment.
Yeah.
Anything beyond that were just great. And then a few days later, it was actually you that it was you.
I was talking
about it first.
Because I always stop whenever I see the cover. I always stop because, I'm such a good fan of the book, and knowing you as well now, I stop and I see what people are saying about it. And then I saw his face behind it. I was like, it took me a moment. And then I messaged you and I said, wow, this is amazing. Congratulations.
You took a screenshot.
Yeah.
The screenshot that you just caught the final line. Saying Dynamite and Davey is an exceptional book.
Yeah.
I hope you will all take the time to go and read it, or whatever he's put.
Yeah.
So I thought that's all he'd put. I thought that was the post. So when I was actually off Facebook at the time. I had to re-sign up to Facebook just to see it. I had to fire my account back up just to see it. So when I did, I realised that it just carried scrolling and scrolling, and there were more and more and more.
I couldn't fit the whole thing on.
See him actually mention me by name. What a brilliant job he thought I'd done. It were above and beyond anything I ever thought. I know that I won't mention any names. It's up to them if they want to speak about it publicly. But I know at least another 2 extremely household names have read it, and so far, what I know that the responses has been overwhelmingly good. So I'd like, obviously, something similar from them, but if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't,
I'm guessing your reaction to when I messaged you you weren't expecting that. You had no idea. Did you have any idea you had it?
I knew he had it. Yeah. Because I'd already heard on grapevine about it. Being 2/3 way into it and all this, and talking about it on this show in Australia. So it weren't a huge shock, but it's still
the fact that he'd gone through the trouble. I mean,
to still see it was extraudinarily surreal.
Yeah, and like you say, the fact that he wrote half a book
on his post. I wrote a housewarming. Obviously, it were a lovely sunny day, But everybody had sort of splintered off into little groups, and I went round ruining loads of people's conversations. Look at this, look at this, look at this. Some of them reacted exactly how me and you would react, to know exactly what it was and what it meant.
Yeah.
Some of them didn't have a clue who this man was or what he had in his hand. But there you go.
Job done. Frame that.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's been amazing to see the success that it's had so far, and you know, it's going to be really good to see where else it can go.
Well, speaking of that, actually, sorry to interrupt, but
no, go on.
I'm almost finished recording the audio version of the book, which
of course,
that's only happening because of the success. You know, it's not sort of a cheap thing to do in publishing it in audio format in full. The amount of production and things that are involved, but based on the success of the book so far, the publishers decided to go for it. So I'm almost finished that. So anybody that's like me, an avid listener of books rather than reader of books at times, just because of time constraints on your life and things, you'll be able to get that in a few.
You're doing the narration yourself?
I am, yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
Well, it is. I mean, I'm enjoying doing it, and I'm not far off done. And I've got more and more comfortable with it as I've gone on. But the bit that sort of, because I'm such an avid reader of audiobooks, and they're generally so brilliantly read by people like Stephen Fry, who
it's a pretty big shoes to fill there.
Puts a subtle voice on and accents for every different character. I mean, I just couldn't even contemplate doing that. So I'm afraid I'm sorry, but Bret Hart has got a Yorkshire accent in this book, and you're always going to have to live with it.
I'm sure we can get past that. No, that's brilliant. That's brilliant, and it brings us back to why we're here today. You know, Davey's story carries on. I mean, it's obviously with the WWE coming back over here in a few weeks' time, with another major pay-per-view, the first one for 30 years. We're here to talk about the one that happened 30 years ago. We had the initial idea we were going to sit here and watch the whole event, and then we decided actually that's probably not the most interesting thing for the viewers and listeners to really experience, as much as I would have loved to have done it. So what we are going to do is we're going to do a little bit of a watch along. So for those watching in video, you will be able to see the match taking place as we talk about it. Those in audio, you'll just have to listen and absorb, and we'll, you know, be reminiscing. And I'll be interested really in your take on the event, what's happening, because you probably got a bit more sort of inside knowledge about that.
I look forward to chatting about that, especially how it all came about, what happened in the build-up. You know, Davey was out of sorts, injured in the build-up, and sort of obviously that research that I've done, I know quite a lot how all that came about. And so I'm happy to talk about all that.
Cool, because it still remains. This is probably, for me, getting into wrestling late in 91, early 92. This is the event that really sticks out in my mind, is the one my childhood revolved around.
I think it's the event that sealed the deal for what happened with Britain's relationship with the WWF, Sky TV's relationship with the WWF, and ultimately everything going forward in terms of giving pro wrestling a place in the UK. It had lost its way. It only had, at that point, it only really had any kind of mainstream. It was WWF.
Yeah,
that could have waned, especially as we went into the mid-90s, and the WWF lost a bit of direction, and but it was this event, I think, ingrained it in people's mind. Davey and Bret especially became darlings forever.
Well, they had this was round about the time, I think, that Slam Jam the single was out, if I remember rightly, or maybe just after. Right, yeah. So, you know, riding the wave, I had it. I've got it again. I've reinvested in it recently just because I absolutely love it. You know, the riding the mainstream wave off the back of particularly this event, and it got to that point where they were so popular they could pack out Wembley Stadium. I mean, it was no mean feat. Childhood memories of the event. Let's start there, shall we? Really?
I think actually you're slightly older than me. I think I might say maybe only by weeks or months.
Maybe. Yeah. Wrong about that. How old were you in '92 when this took place?
In in August 92, I would have been just about to turn 7. I would have been just before my 7th.
Okay. Yeah. So I was 8. Yeah, just over 8. But I mean, were you, just remind me, were you a wrestling fan at that point?
I think I've got to have been, purely because I remember the Hulk Hogan era in the back of my mind. I remember Andre the Giant from being a child and actually being on the screen. The problem is, I think with that is you're not sure how much of a delay or lag there was in the Sky TV coverage. So I'm never quite sure what I was watching or what I was exposed to at different times. What I do remember, and I write this in the opening of the book, is WrestleMania 8, which was so that would have been the April before this event. That's when Bret regained the IC title from Roddy Piper. That, and again, I'm not sure when I watched it in terms of how current it was or if it had already been out a while. But that is one of my earliest memories. That match is one of, if not my earliest vivid memory. So that was before this. So I know that I were a fan. I know that I had the Hasbros. I know I had the Andre Hasbro. So I've got to have been, again, how current it was at that time to what I was watching and experiencing. I don't know. At what point I first saw this event and this match, again, I'm not 100%.
No, I can't remember when I first saw it. I know my cousin was there, so I remember being very jealous. And then when the next time I saw him after the event, which probably was a few months after, he showed me he had bought, when he was there, he had bought the LED foam shoulder pads. He had bought the Bret Hart sunglasses. He had his ticket stub back then when tickets actually had a picture on it and everything to commemorate it. Very, very jealous. And this was the one videotape actually that I would treasure for years.
And it's strange, isn't it? Because I honestly don't think, there's the Clash at the Castle coming up. I don't think there is anything that could possibly happen that would mean that in 30 years' time, there's people talking about that like we're talking about this. It can't possibly do it. And it was just of its time. It were a pop culture phenomenon that can't be repeated, I don't think.
I think the whole event, I think the more I thought about it, the way they set it up was, it was win-win for the fans, really, because I can't think of any other event where you had a double main event where it was 4 good guys. You had Savage against the Warrior in the middle, and Bret and the Bulldog. I don't think the 2 top titles were babyface, the complete babyface matches.
Yeah, you're right. I've thought about it. Actually, Flair with a wild card, one for obviously he came and got involved. So nobody knew which way you were gonna. I didn't.
What were your thoughts? And just very quickly on the whole Mr. Perfect being in the corner. I never bought that. I don't understand why either one of them. Why we would believe that either one of them would want Mr. Perfect in his corner.
I think the problem is he was just TV gold, wasn't he? And he obviously had a lot of injuries at the time, and they just needed to get him on TV and preferably in and around the main event. I mean, I don't know about you, but I always remember probably even thinking it as a youngster, and I certainly think it now when I view it aesthetically. He's supposed to be at this time. He's supposed to be in and around this time. He's supposed to be almost Flair's manager. Now, you look at them, you've got a man in his 40s, and clearly in his 40s, he's looking every bit of that. He's smaller than Kurt Hennig. Kurt's stacked, Flair's not. And aesthetically, you think, hang on a minute. Which one's the wrestler and which one's the manager here? You mean to tell me that he couldn't take him at any point?
It just, I don't know. It was odd. It was an odd pair. They worked well together. I just didn't get the whole. Having them involved in the match was one thing, but how we were supposed to believe that Savage and Warrior were trying to convince him to be in their corner. They've been at each other's throats for weeks. Like those 4. Why would Perfect be there to help anyone?
I think a lot of it to do with the Hogan situation as well. They were eventually trying to shoehorn in eventually a Hogan Flair feud, but Hogan was, in and around and a bit of controversy surrounding him at the time. Yeah, I think it just
they had to think on their feet.
It were a bit square pegs in round holes.
Yeah, and I think
they had the talent that they wanted to get in them positions, but not necessarily in that order.
No, an event of this magnitude with Ric Flair not actively on the card, I think.
Yeah, when he were there as well,
it's odd, but there we go. There we go. Apart from the obvious one, then Bret and the Bulldog, what was your other favourite match of the card? Do you remember?
I think it's got to be that one, just purely because there's a bit of a feeling. I love that they gave the Undertaker the full huge pomp and ceremony for it. And I just think the production of the whole show is fantastic. Like, it starts, bearing in mind it's open air stadium. You don't often get that level of sunshine in the UK. So it's done anyway. So when the event starts with Money Inc. and LOD and in these sort of matches, whilst I think there's an argument to be made that there's a little bit of going through the motions. I think there's nothing special about any performances in the early stages.
No,
I don't think any of the matches except Bret and Bulldog, if I'm honest. I don't think any of them pull up any trees or do anything extra special. They just go through the motions. But I think because it was such a rarity to have these superstars in the UK in that setting at that time in Wembley Stadium, to start off in the blazing sunshine, created some really iconic visuals. And then as the event went on, I think obviously the sun sets and it's like
it was great,
really cosmic sky, all purple, and that timed perfectly for the Undertaker's entrance, which they give the full pomp and ceremony to let the UK fans have that full experience, which is great. But again, him and Kamala probably just do go through the motions. It's quite a short match, ends in a melee and disqualification.
There was
again, I think they were far more about the spectacle than any kind of wrestling event apart from the main event, and then they made up for everything. And because they were so spectacular and that match is so spectacular, any other limitations that the others have are instantly forgotten about, I think.
That's true.
Right.
My only, because I didn't see it on pay-per-view, I didn't see a recording of it, my first watch of it is on VHS. So I grew up thinking all these other matches which people didn't see, like the 6-man tag with Jim Duggan and the Bushwhackers and Nasties and the Mountie. I thought everyone knew that they were on there. But if there's people today that's like, I can't wait to see when they release the new one or when it's on the network or whatever. Can't wait to see El Matador against Papa Shango. I was like, Christ, that was one of my favourite matches back then. I thought everyone had seen that one.
I think there were a certain element of just throwing. I think it was probably the standard sort of house show matches that were happening at the time. And I think in terms of performance and the card that was set up, I think they probably treat it a lot like that. And I think it's only because we know what happens in the main event, and we know, especially through my research and everything, and there's so many more layers to why they pulled out all the stops in that way. And especially Bret being such a student of wrestling and knowing, I think he understood more than probably anybody else on the card exactly what that were going to mean and how iconic it could be. And there we go. And we're left with a masterpiece, which we won't waste too much longer. We'll get into it in a second. I've just I hinted there was a couple of things that I've found just going through my news feed, which I thought was worth mentioning. So obviously, by the time this episode goes out, we'll be a couple of days shy. This is my intention. It will be a couple of days shy of the actual 30th anniversary of SummerSlam 92, which is on the 29th of August, if I've got that right. But as we're sat recording, bring down the fourth wall, 18th of August. So some British Bulldog anniversaries. So 29 years ago, he was part of the Shockmaster's debut. Is that today?
Yes, today.
Wow,
29 years ago. So, you know, a little under a year after the best.
Let's have a watch along of that instead.
That'd be amazing. And then 26 years ago, he actually wrestled Sid, who was part of that same angle at SummerSlam 96.
Yes, yeah, SummerSlam 96, yes.
So, you know, I thought a couple of relevant sort of Bulldog related anniversaries.
SummerSlam, even going back to the Bulldogs, such an history with SummerSlam, and obviously I cover it in the book. And I remember doing a social media post about it last year, which is obviously 12 months ago now, which is scary. But yes, so you're talking 88. They wrestled the Rougeaus to the.
That was a classic.
It was absolutely fantastically executed match, but it led to the heat between the guys, which led to the sucker punch and was the downfall of the Bulldogs as a team, and certainly as Tom as a single star. And then obviously 92, we've got Bret. Davey and Bret. 94 was Davey's big return
in the cage match.
During the cage match, Bret and Owen. And it just sort of went on and on from there. And I think it's something that gets overlooked. Bret's obviously got quite an iconic history at SummerSlam, and Davey's very much linked to that as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, being a massive Bret Hart mark, especially with this match. You know, looking back on his history a year before his classic match with Mr. Perfect.
Yeah.
Bret and Owen, I think next to this one is one of my favourite matches.
Yeah, you
ever.
Just can't take your eyes off it, can you?
No. And I mean, what happened in 95? Let's ignore what happened in 95. Shall we? Him and the dentist. Anyway, shall we roll into it?
Yeah.
Before we run out of too much more road. I would say, all right, we're probably ready. Synchronized watches.
3, 2, 1.
1. I was going out. Right, bear with. Rewind.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Rule Britannia has just hit. All right.
Right.
Here comes Lennox Lewis.
Right.
He was Commonwealth and European heavyweight champion at the time, and within a matter of months would be world heavyweight champion.
But it's like, was there much sort of recognition? I wasn't familiar with boxing at this point. Was he, obviously looking back on it, he's a massive name. We know what he became. Was there that kind of recognition then?
The Olympics had what made him. So I think the 88 plucked that out of my mind, but I think it was the 88 Olympics that he competed for Britain in and won. So it was very mainstream at the time.
Yeah.
So Davey, I mean, I've probably over-analysed it, given my research and everything, but there's a particular moment there, and on mine is just sort of punched the air, and I think he puffs his chest out a little bit there, and I think that is absolute flood of relief coming over him, and he feels comfort in his own skin again, because he's had a torrid few months. So just as the background, he failed a drugs test in April. So he'd had a stellar 91, which was his comeback after the Bulldogs era. The Bulldogs had left. He'd come back, had a stellar 91, getting pushed strong. Had a real strong showing at the 92 Rumble, which was the one that Flair won the title at. Obviously, a historic 92 Rumble event. Davey was number one entrant, lasted most of the match.
Yeah.
Real strong showing. It was Flair that eliminated him. And so, sort of getting pushed strong, very strong. And then, rather catastrophically, had a failed drugs test in April at the point when Vince was having to crack down on it because of the heat was very much on him because of everything that was going on behind the scenes. And so it were a bit of a no tolerance, or certainly less tolerance than it had been. So it were an immediate 6-week suspension for that failed drugs test. At that point, David were already struggling with his back and his knees, already having to take quite a lot of painkillers for that. And so when he came back from injury. They introduced him back. I think it was actually the 1st of June. He got introduced back, won a battle royal, and they made him go on this winning streak, really getting pushed back strong. But he were winning his matches in really short order, and was still, not in his peak cardiovascular condition. I think because of the layoff. Obviously, Bret says in his book that, at that time, Davey was on the verge of going a little bit off the rails. He was living in Florida and spending a lot of time with Jim Neidhart,
Yeah.
And so when he came back, and then he, in July, so I think 6 weeks after it went in sort of 6 week segments, he had a 6 week layoff with the suspension, and then 6 weeks back in action, but only doing these sort of short matches. He'd had a match with Iron Mike Sharp, short match, and was having to take painkillers for his knee after the match. Wasn't sure what he'd done. Again, the painkillers have got that troublesome trait of masking what might be the root cause, and he'd blown his knee out in the match and didn't really know, because the painkillers were masking the problem largely.
Yeah.
And so when he went to bed that night in the hotel, staying away from home, he woke up dripping with sweat, pure agony, screaming in agony because the painkillers had wore off, and it turned out his knee was just completely shot. He ultimately got a staph infection for that, and he didn't wrestle again. They'd already got this match penciled in, so just to begin a bit of background about this match, or this event, they originally planned to have SummerSlam 92 in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And it was planned that Shawn would be challenging Bret and possibly even going over. That's
okay.
For the IC belt, and it were only the surge in popularity off the back of Davey that made Vince eye up this huge event in the UK and at Wembley Stadium. And so they pivoted, and it was largely Bret that sold Vince on the idea.
Right.
So around that time as well, Bret was selling Vince on the idea of the ladder match, which ultimately, they did one at a house show or behind closed doors or Dynamite. Well, Bret and Shawn had a ladder match which went spectacularly well.
Yeah.
And that were all Bret's idea from him doing it with Dynamite and Stampede.
Yeah.
So the idea was that with the IC belt on the line, it would be Shawn versus Bret at some point around this time, and they'd got SummerSlam 92 lined up in Washington DC for that. And it were only the introduction of Davey, him being over so strong in the UK, and it's the UK's tours being so strong, that they decided to pivot and go to this event, and obviously wanted Davey to go over. So that's why it's only Davey's reign only tragically ends up being sort of 59 days, and it's Shawn that gets the belt over.
Right.
Because it were always planned that he would be the next heel champion. After Bret tends to obviously go like that, doesn't it? Heel champion, babyface champion as they pass it on through.
Yeah.
So the plan was that Shawn was going to be the next champion, and so Davey gets the belt more than justifiably, is over well enough to be the IC champion at the stage. There's no doubt about it. And I don't think there's any hint of him being a transitional champion. I know he will.
I was going to say that, because it's a bit harsh, isn't it, when you look at some of the others that have had.
Into that, I just think it was always going to be Shawn next, because they've gone from babyface champion to babyface champion. It's easy enough for him to say we're still on track to have Shawn next. Yeah. So that's how we ended up here at Wembley Stadium, and it was Bret that sold Vince on the idea. And
I think it fits perfectly. You were talking about Davey's push in 91, and again the early part of 92, and I think this fit with that.
Oh, it did.
There needed to be a payoff there for him somewhere.
And it's perfect for that. And in the shuffle that was happening post Hogan and Warrior. I mean, I know Warrior's in the title match of this event. Warrior's days have been over to the level that it were well gone. And in the post, as they're wanting to ease to a post steroid era, obviously Warrior couldn't be the man.
No.
So there's a bit of a shuffle going on. Flair has come in. He gets the belt briefly. Amazing work from Davey on my screen there. But Flair again never truly settled into the WWF, and Vince always loved to have long-term babyface champions with defending against all comers. Flair, we're always going to be a heel in the WWF.
Yeah.
Kind of needs to have the belt to carry off that trope, to carry off that.
Yes.
It kind of needs that, and so it was just never a match made in heaven at this stage. Weren't Flair and the WWF, it were never going to work out.
No.
So if you take Flair out of the equation, post Hogan, post Warrior, even Savage has probably passed his true peak. Certainly in Vince's eyes at this point. I think we're trying to move him into a more commentary based point. There was a shuffle going on for who were going to be the man, and Davey was absolutely in that mix, rightfully so. And as this match attests to, but then again, the catastrophic thing is obviously that he has his second sort of drug offence. Comes within 2 months of this match. That causes the sort of early belt transition over to Shawn, and then he has to be let go because of the first one. And then this zero tolerance time. It was just wrong place at wrong time, and
unfortunately he had to be almost made. I mean, it's justified, but he almost had to be made an example of.
Him and Warrior, and I think Vince was happy in that scenario to see Warrior down the road. Again, he was sort of almost a poster boy for that steroid era. I think he wanted to move away from, and then with that drug offence, which for those who don't know, it was about they discovered that growth hormone was less likely to show up on testing than the natural steroids. And so Ultimate Warrior was getting, after this event, Ultimate Warrior were getting shipments of growth hormone delivered overseas, going through customs. Once they got flagged up, with Vince being very much under the spotlight as it was, it was right. Sorry, I've got to make an absolute example here where you're down the road. At which point, Jim Elwig's sung like a canary and implicated Davey, saying that Davey had hooked him up with this guy in Britain. Now, I've heard different stories of Davey's level of implication into that. From what I can gather, it was literally, try him over there.
I see, just a recommendation rather than a.
So he weren't anywhere near as guilty as Jim and the first incident.
I think
the story is Dave's excuse in the first one was that it'd been in a room where they were all smoking pot and other things were going on, and it sort of failed a drugs test almost as a third party, so that were his events at that time. So it certainly classed himself and other people did as a bit more of a victim and a victim of circumstances.
So say Vince is obviously very nervous around this time.
Very nervous, and I think that was Davy's point, especially for the first one. His point was people have been getting away with far worse than this for a lot longer.
He just happened to be the next one that got caught
at that time. And so one thing led to another. It was a shame because, as I say, we're very much in the shuffle for that main event slot, I think, around this time, and then he ended up in WCW and then coming back eventually, and sort of to say his career was a roller coaster and his personal life was a roller coaster from that point on, it'd be a bit of an understatement. But obviously,
when you see how this match finishes, and it's such a momentous occasion. I don't think anyone could not feel goosebumps when they watch this back, and then just to kind of see where he was. I didn't know a lot about his WCW run at the time, I think, because it was hard to kind of get WCW programming over here in the UK in sort of 93. But looking back on it, it's a shame not more was done with him, but whether it was they didn't know what to do with him, or whether he didn't have the time there, or whatever.
His first run at WCW had some superb matches, and it were actually, you could argue, it were at his peak. You watch his performances against Vader in particular. The strength and the athleticism is just off the chart.
Yeah.
But I think again, WCW, as opposed to they carried on the NWA tradition of having a heel champion, which is why Flair had the belt so much.
Yeah.
And Vader was that champion at the time. Davey was one of his main challengers. They had a lot of good matches on pay-per-view. He never went over or got the belt ultimately, and then it all ended there in a sorry fashion as well. We're having a rivalry with Rick Rude.
That's a match I would have loved to have seen.
He had some amazing matches with Regal as well.
Yeah,
really took pride in showing the British style off there.
Yeah,
and he when they had a UK tour, he felt hard done to about what he wore recompense. They didn't feel that he'd been rewarded financially as he'd been promised he would before for being the man on the European and UK tours. That led to a bit of a standoff between him and Eric Bischoff that ultimately led to him leaving.
Yeah. I just to change tracks here, just something that I'm watching this part of the match back that I remember from back then is you see a few spots creep in here where Bret is taking on the heel sort of.
He knows Esther, and that's, I think, you can see how brilliant he is at that ear.
And at the time,
5 years later in '97, he takes on that persona full time. Where he is still largely a babyface a lot, but he's just antagonising and just it's the subtle things, and it's more in the match than in his general demeanour or anything like that. You know, he don't treat the fans like idiots, where he comes out one day smiling, and then frowning and calling everybody names, and you know it's so subtle, the difference between face heel and heel Bret. So I think that's just a bit.
At the time, I wasn't really familiar with his heel run with the Hart Foundation. That this was still early days for me. So seeing him like that was really odd for me. I didn't like it, but sort of looking back now, this moment here, if you're at the same point I am, hopefully, where he's just done a dive over the ropes outside. Am I right in thinking that wasn't how it was meant to be? Was he meant to come down on him, do you know, in a typical kind of plancha sort of dive at a body press, and Davey wasn't in the right position and he had to go behind him?
I think that is one of the sort of accusations that Davey misses a few spots in this match, and then that the link is that's to the fact that obviously he wasn't in ultimate peak condition, and he was gassed. You know, that's what Bret says in his book, is that Davey was completely, he sort of forgot a lot of what they'd agreed. But what I think, the way that I've told it in the book, I've sort of missed out the bit about his party animal with Jim Neidhart. I chose in the end not to include that. I did include it in an early draft, but a contributor who asked to remain anonymous was quite vehement that shouldn't be put in there. And whilst I haven't done it as a negative thing, you know, part of the old book is that we're kind of living a bit of the lives of rock stars at the time. And I think that's just a fact. So I haven't put it as, this reckless guy was. No. I'd never put that. It was never on the agenda. It's not for Tom. It's not for Bret. For Davey. It's that they were living this. They were living this lifestyle. They were still such young men. They were living this lifestyle where they were performing every single night to this extraordinary level. But boy, were they letting their hair down. You know? And so. And the other thing with Davey was he loved his wrestling so much. It was his life. And it's no coincidence that the various times when he went sort of a little bit, off
the rails.
Well, when he wore out of the ring, you know, and wrestling. It'd been wrestling since he was 15. That's what sort of centered him, I think. Again, just based on everything that I've read and seen. And so I had never written it as, oh, damn you, David Boy. You know, I'd never written it like,
no.
oh my God, you know, he's got this big match coming up. What is he going to do? You know, he's sort of at a crossroads in his life, blah, 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 you know. And the way that I'd written it was that he went from that to have this event, this performance, this spectacular event that, you know, out of nowhere, sort of an amazing recovery story from that point. Because it was a repeated event for him, you know, going back to the things that happened with him and Tom, going to the car crash that almost killed him. This injury and struggles around here, gets the staph infection, a knee injury that's plaguing him here, yet he goes and has this performance. And then even all the way up to getting completely written off in 1999 as he might die. There's a good chance he'll be in a wheelchair forever when he was suffering this real back injury and infection. But certainly his career is absolutely definitely over. And yet he made a comeback and had another run in the WWF main event of pay-per-views again. So it was a common theme that I wanted to put across, was just Davey's resilience and how he overcome things and kept on doing that. So that's what I've written. I still write it that way, but without that, because once I had that sort of challenge on that, I didn't feel... I sort of had this bit of a rule, not hard and fast, but, you know, I had for anything negative and controversial, I needed more sources that backed it up than said it didn't. And that didn't at what point. It was one source, which was against this other source. And so at that point, I thought, well, if kind of... I can take that out and tell the same story without it. I have noticed that I think 2 not negative reviews on Amazon from customers on Amazon have put almost accused me of whitewashing that a little bit. Because I hadn't included it. I don't see it that way.
No. As long as you've got reasons for it, I mean, that's perfectly understandable. You know, just to be told, anyone can come to you and say, this is my side of it. You're not going to write it in. You're not going to say something unless it's corroborated. You know, you've got to be careful. That's
what I mean. And I've never had anybody say that it wasn't true. I trust Bret's book implicitly, by the way. And he has actually said to me on the phone, not dropping names there, I'll say it. I spoke to him on the phone. And he did say to me, you can trust my book implicitly. You know, we weren't talking about this event or this incident.
No.
We were talking about the Jacques Rougeau Dynamite incident. He said, I stand by my version of events. I've heard a lot of version of events of that.
Right.
I stand by my version of events of the book. He told me that Dave Meltzer regularly has told him on quite a few occasions that he, as in Dave Meltzer, regularly refers back to Bret's book because he trusts its accuracy. Bret were actually keeping diaries and like a bit of a dictaphone at the time, talking about what he was doing and what were happening. That's why his dates are so accurate.
Right.
So, he stands by it for its accuracy.
That's good. I love his.
So you know,
I love his book. I think it's
my favourite book. Right, but it just pipped Mick Foley's in terms of my favourite. Probably not even wrestling book, probably sports book if I'm honest.
Okay.
I think it's magnificent work of art, and I think that it's just like Bret with everything. He took so much pride in it. He didn't rush it out there. He didn't do it in 1996. He didn't do it in 1998 immediately after.
I was going to say he had a perfect chance there, but
like almost 10 years after that, sort of 2005, 2006, he finally brought it out. Spent so much time on it. Again, just having that pride in.
Nobody would want to read a book that he wrote, I don't think, in 98. It would end on such a sour and dramatic point. I think leaving it,
or even then if it were immediately after Owen, or taking that time, applying the context and making it such a fantastic work of art that it is. So I sort of do trust its accuracy, but again, I sort of have this rule about one sources equaling each other out, and at that point I would neutralise it and not include it, or I might ask Ross how he thought. He said he couldn't give me a certain answer one way or the other. So at that point I thought, I just sort of reworded it. It were only a couple of sentences.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
And I still think I told that story about Davey overcoming the demons to have. So when I said at the start of this, when he were doing his walkout and he seen him punch the air and puff out his chest, if you look at him just before that, you could argue, and in his promo, I think he looks nervous.
It does. And I was going to, as part of this, I was hoping to play the promos. Davey's promo is...
Yeah, it's
when you compare the two.
Yeah. Bret's on it. He knows exactly what to say.
Yeah.
Davey looks nervous. He looks like he's trying to convince you that he isn't nervous.
Yeah.
And I think for that, given the fact that once you know everything that he's been through the previous 2 or 3 months,
it makes perfect sense.
He's hardly wrestled. He's got injuries. He's carrying injuries as we speak. He's in front of this crowd with this pressure. You can see why he would be nervous. And I think once he puffs his chest out, the crowd get behind him. He sees all the Union Jack flags.
Yeah.
I think it's a flood of relief, and I think that's what leads to this performance. So yeah, I think the problem is with people. Obviously, Bret's book sold however many hundreds of copies. I think it's easy for people to look at that and then overanalyze Davey's performance. The couple of missed spots, maybe, that you could argue, that the accusations that he lost his way a little bit and all that.
But you wouldn't know. And I mean, my other question was going to be, could he have had this kind of performance with anyone else that night besides Bret?
I'd just say probably not.
Because I think even that missed spot on the outside that I brought up, I mean, the fact I remember it is because it was such a brutal move. It's and it would look like it was meant to be. And it's only sort of more recently that I found that actually that probably wasn't meant to happen the way Bret did it. But the fact that Bret can recover from that, think in midair, how am I going to turn this out? He's not quite where he's supposed to be. But together, they both made it look like it was supposed to happen. And it made it seem more real. And that's what I loved about this match. There was sort of real drama behind it. You could totally believe it. And Bret's promo before this match was one that I would repeat myself back then. I absolutely loved. It's a bit like the one that he made before his match in '94 against Owen. I think it's just, you believe him. You don't think he's been rehearsing it.
There's no wasted. There's no wasted over the top actions in what he does. Everything's so deliberate, and believable, and that's what he built his whole career on.
Yeah. The way they built this match up beforehand as well, with talking to Diana in the crowd and stuff. I mean, they made it. This was about as genuine as I think wrestling could.
The one-off, they've done it. They've done it, and again, I tell it in the book, but they've done it 10 years earlier. Obviously, that was on a much smaller scale, but they've done it as a one-off for Stampede, just a small show. Neither of them had any major program going at the time, and they decided they were both babyface at the time. Again, Bret's idea, as he writes it, why don't we have an all babyface match for the North American heavyweight title? Bret was holding it at the time. They thought it was going to be an odd thing to do, all babyface match. They were both really popular. And they had this amazing match and built it up in the same way that they built this one up. And that's how Bret managed to sell it to Vince. We've done it before, we'll do it again.
Yeah.
On this much huger, grander scale.
Yeah.
So that's when you really start to peel off the layers of that onion and you look at what it ended up producing 10 years later on this grandest scale of them all.
Yeah.
And then it ends, obviously, as it does, with the fireworks and Diana being in the ring in between.
Yeah, it was perfect.
It's Shakespearean, man.
It is. I think they one of the other, I don't know if we spoke about it last time that we chatted, but one of the other massive matches linked to both these two is Canadian Stampede in '97, the 10-man tag. I don't remember that as fondly. I didn't think around about that time that was a fantastic match, but the drama, again, the story behind it, and right at the end when the ring is full of the Hart family. Yeah. I mean, that's big, and especially in the middle of his real kind of heel turn. to have a reaction from a crowd quite like he had at that event.
That's because of the authenticity that, you know, they knew they'd been watching him for 20 years at that point. They knew what him, and especially how he's so popular. Davey so popular with that people. It was of its time, and nothing will be reproduced like that. That passion, that energy. And again, here I think I'm right in saying I think Davey, despite the fact that they had quite a few matches in the end, I think maybe 3. I think it was singles matches. Davey goes over in this one. Bret goes over in the other 2. Davey is one of the few people to have the sharpshooter on him multiple times and never tap out, which I think that's great that Bret almost gave him that, because that puts him over way, you know. That makes him look strong. Everybody else is tapping the moment that goes on at this point.
Exactly, and he's made it to the ropes.
Flair does it just a couple of months later when Bret wins the tap Flair. And
then it goes to this, you know.
And I think it's almost like, here we go. Iconic.
And that roll up, nobody saw it coming. I didn't see that coming, that anyone could win a match like that. It's a little bit like, I suppose, the way that Owen won at WrestleMania. You didn't see it coming.
No, exactly.
It's just something quite simple.
And the iconic commentary from Vince here about one of the greatest matches we've ever seen. And, you know, but just everything. You couldn't almost, you know, if you'd have done multiple rehearsals of the whole event, from the commentary moments to the visuals to the performances to the ending with the fireworks, you couldn't get a better take. You know, it's amazing, really, how it came together the way it did.
Yeah, and I for an event like this to end on there, it was probably always going to be the plan because it was in England and that. But for a major event to end with the IC title match, again, I hadn't seen that before. You know, it always ended with the world title.
It was purely, you know, and I think Bret writes it that he convinced Vince at that. His exact words were, "Nobody will be able to follow us."
No.
And I mean, can you imagine Jim Elwig coming out after this?
No, I mean, I can imagine. I think one of the other matches that they probably want on the main broadcast around just before this was Tatanka and the Berserker. I mean, can you imagine what the crowd would have been like for that one? You know, a little bit more placid than they already were. Yeah, no, it's I don't know. I wasn't sure. You know, at this point, they could have followed through with this and had Bret turn heel. That would have been a little bit of a predictable end.
It was too old. The moment he goes back to the States, that's ruined altogether.
Exactly.
It's just good acting, really.
It's brilliant.
Pure frustration is acting like he believes a man of his competitive nature should act.
I think you've got to give it to Diana in this because she is
plays
obviously emotional, you know, in it.
Yeah.
And what was Bret saying to him then? What do you reckon?
Well,
Bret,
again, in his book, he writes that he felt that went on a little bit too long, and he thinks they got it slight. I don't. When you watch it, I think it works perfect. I think it builds up perfectly, and then they kick the music in again straight after.
Yeah.
He thinks, and it's probably more worry on his part. He thinks, if this don't work out, if we don't get this moment right, we've kind of ruined the story. Yeah. So it'll probably just worry his time that it weren't going to come off, and Davey might turn around and celebrate again. I think he wanted to get the embracing and the handshake done a little bit earlier and a little bit quicker. But I think it builds up to a perfect, like, dramatic.
It does, yeah. And that iconic image, you see this everywhere still today, you know, and here we are, talking about, like you say, 30 years later, what are the matches from then? Are we still talking about like this one? I mean, 92 is...
You won't, and it's nothing against anybody at all.
They couldn't top this.
It's not saying that Roman Reigns or Brock Lesnar or whoever you might name isn't as good as these guys or isn't as, talented.
Yeah.
Whatever it might be. It's just of its time now. How much credit you give to these guys for it being that? Again, I would give them lots of credit and say that they deserve everything they get, and that's why it's iconic. It is because of them. But whether it's because we've seen it, so nothing can quite follow that, you're into like the Beatles argument, aren't they? You know, no matter how good any rock band are, they'll never be the Beatles because the Beatles did it first. So is it a bit of that? Is it just the fact that these guys did this event and this performance with the pyro and the fireworks and the commentary at this time? And so after, when it's done equally as good 5 years later and then 10 years later and then 50 years later, it doesn't quite have that same...
No.
It probably is something to do with that as well. I don't know. It's just of its time. And
it is.
unique.
I think, perfect setting, perfect story, you know, perfect match. Won't say the perfect event. It's still definitely up there as one of my favorites. I'll always go back and watch it. But, you know.
And it's not just that we remember it so fondly because it's here in the UK. I know that even in the US, I'm on Wrestle Post with John Pollock actually on the 29th on the
cool.
The anniversary. You know, it's not something that they take lightly either.
No,
to talk about it.
No.
You know, I mean, every pay-per-view in the US has got a 30th anniversary at the minute, or every 25th anniversary if you're going back to 97.
Yeah.
So, you know, you don't have this every month or every 6 months, do you? But even they recognise the 30th anniversary of SummerSlam 92 as being a special event.
That's special. I even though I won't be paying much attention to Clash at the Castle, I don't think you can compare the two. It's a completely different time.
No, it's a nod. It's a nod of respect. I think the fact that they're bringing it over.
Yeah.
I'd like to have seen them try Wembley as the ultimate anniversary special, but would that have just highlighted the fact that they can't follow that?
I was about to say that. You know why? Yeah, would that just bring the wrong kind of comparisons?
Yeah,
you know, because it's never going to be the same. You know, that's. But there we go. Even if I don't even know the card. I would imagine Roman Reigns is against Drew McIntyre. That's what they've been theorizing for months and months.
Yeah. What it is. I read that Karrion Kross had come back and ejected himself into it somehow, but I don't know.
Okay. I mean, if McIntyre was going to win, you know, is it too predictable? Back in '92, you may have been able to say the same thing. You know, it's in England, the Bulldogs got to go over, but it probably was never a given. You know that he would.
I mean, you'd have said that in '97 against Shawn, wouldn't you? But
there we go. Yeah, that's true.
Happened there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. There we go. No, that's been a pleasure reliving that with you and having your insight there, mate. That's fantastic, and it's certainly, you know, it helps put the amount of times I watch that match. I think I'm learning something new from it all the time anyway, because you're always looking at it differently, and I think you definitely given a lot more background in there, which was fantastic.
It's just fascinating when you couple it up with what an iconic event it is, and just the level of execution that were involved, to know that it were kind of all in disarray in them months, especially Davey's fitness and health and one thing and another. And I think it just almost makes you appreciate it even more how they pulled it off on the night.
Yeah. And to be fair, going back to our last conversation, and you said that this wasn't even your favourite match of Bret and Davies. It was probably actually the In Your House 5 one, or that you preferred that one. I didn't like that one because I was always very fond of SummerSlam, and I thought that one was just too brutal. I didn't really buy into Davey as a heel. Reading your book since we've last spoken and learning more about the matches they had in Stampede, which then you can compare that In Your House 1 too. I got a completely different kind of respect for it.
I think I followed the same journey. It was only when, through all the research and everything, that you realise the only way that they could follow that was to roll back the years and have an old Stampede type match.
Yeah.
And again, to pull that off in that environment when blading was embargoed and
Yeah.
They had to sort of do that to really get that reaction. And the crowd are frenzied during that's going on. And so, I don't think at the time, I think if you'd have played them both to me side by side 3 years ago, I think I'd have gone, oh, there's only one winner. Look at that.
Yeah.
But I think as I learned more and more about it, again, the Davey Owen European title match in '97 in Germany.
Yeah.
To watch them pull that off, what they did there, again, knowing, once I'd done all the research and knew how close they were as individuals, how they were both such students of the game, especially these European styles, integrated into that match, it gives you so much more of an appreciation of what they're actually doing.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm just sort of such a huge fan. I think particularly if Davies after this, I always like a fan of Davies, but to see him have all these classic matches in different circumstances and knowing that we're going through, different hardships at the time, just so much respect for the guy.
Looking back at his title reigns, actually, it's a shame. Firstly, I didn't realize how many matches he had as IC champion, because you didn't really see it, if you didn't watch TV and whatever. I mean, since there have been so many that I've found where he had when he was recognized as the IC champion.
It were almost nightly. Yeah.
And I felt he didn't, I don't link him with the Intercontinental title like I do others, like, Perfect and Bret and everything. I think, though, Davey is the only one in my mind that made the European title worth anything. It's such a shame to see how that deteriorated, because that was
what happened so quickly after he lost it. And again, you can dig deep out of how much the Clique involvement they had in that. Just didn't like to see someone have any joy.
I was there the night that he lost it in Birmingham. And I was ecstatic at the time, I must admit, because I'm a massive Shawn Michaels fan. I wasn't a massive Bulldog fan of that, but
no, he just turned heel, and and that were his argument for winning it, is the amount of heat that he'd get to turn him heel. Was what he needed. But going back further than that, Davey had been given the European title indefinitely. It had almost been invented for him, so that they could replicate what they'd done at SummerSlam '92.
Yeah,
by having the European title on top, because it was legitimately more important in Europe. Than the big belt, because it was the European title, and the European champion, as Davey Boy, held it, and he was the wrestling champion of Europe. So it was succinct, it was apt, it gave him something that he deserved, something to be proud of. And I do think the whole idea was that every time they came to Europe, they would pack out arenas, particularly in the UK, but all over Europe, by having him on top defending that European title.
Yeah.
But that was the first match in Europe with it, and he lost it.
I know. And I mean, it did well for the whole story they were building, I suppose, heading into, tail end of the year. But looking back on it, it didn't do any favors for him, because then he passed it over to Triple H, and it just became a real kind of throwaway title,
nothing against Val Venus and D'Lo Brown and all that, but once it was just getting passed around like confetti, being used as a just a tool more than anything.
I mean, William Regal probably, it's one until William Regal had any kind of credibility again.
Give it some legitimacy again. I agree.
Yeah, there we go. Anyway, we digress. So anyway, before we wrap up, again, Steve, thank you so much for your time. Guys, you have got to go out, if you haven't already, got to go out and buy this book. You will not regret it. Be like Mick Foley, read it in 3 sittings. Very, very easy to do once you get into it. So not that it's like an easy read.
Be like Mick Foley in general,
Just be like Mick Foley. There you go. You never know. He might be talking about it on his podcast at some point. I haven't actually listened to it yet, so never know. Anyway, Steve, thank you again so much. All the best with everything that you've got coming up, the audio book as well when it comes out, and and stay tuned for even more massive names in the wrestling world picking up your book and raving about it.
Hopefully, touch wood. I think so.
Anyway, so till we meet again, sir, take it easy.
Thanks for having me, mate.
No worries.
Cheers, mate.
Thank you for listening to a Nerd to Know Media production.